What's up, everybody, and welcome into another edition of the Sitdown. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think in the comment section below. Also, if you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sitdown video. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get in to another Mafia topic. And the phrase, the last of the Mohicans, we hear a lot in the American Mafia. As we know, over the last 10 to 20 years, many people have decided to get away from the word loyalty and cooperate against their mob counterparts. The term last of the Mohicans describes a rare breed of mobster that stays true to the oath of omerta. Today's subject, Louis Bobby Manna, fits into the category last of the Mohicans. He is still, to this day, one of the most respected people in the history of the Genovese crime family. The wild story of Bobby Manna, next on Sit-Down Shorts. Louis Bobby Manna was born December 2nd, 1929 in the state of New Jersey. And interestingly enough, Bobby Manna came from a very interesting bloodline. His father, Mauro Manna, seemed here, was a mobster. In fact, he was an accomplished and prolific bootlegger on the very profitable New Jersey waterfront, basically running those areas. He was also, from what many people would call, a very accomplished killer. Now, I did some research and found that going back to 1917, that was really the first time Mauro Manna would actually be arrested, and that an FBI record that was released in 1953 would identify him as being arrested many times. He would actually die in the 50s in federal prison after he was arrested on a hijacking charge. Now, young Bobby Manna would start his career as far as criminal career very quickly. It was actually alleged that Bobby Manna, by his mid-20s, was a made member of the Genovese crime family. He was quickly becoming a very prolific earner for the mob. It was thought that Bobby Manna actually had a gigantic loan sharking book by his mid-20s. He was also very involved with bookmaking, numbers, and other illicit activities. He would quickly slot into the very powerful Tony Bender-Strahler's crew, which we now know was the Greenwich Village crew. Now, eventually, Tony Bender-Strahler would meet his maker, and the crew would eventually be taken over by a young Vincent the Chin Gigante. Now, for Bobby Manna, he was very close with Chin Gigante, and they would be friends for a long period of time. He would long-term operate under Chin Gigante, and when Chin would subsequently be the highest-ranking member of the Genovese crime family, he wouldn't forget his old friend. Now, Bobby Manna would continue to operate and have most of his power in his very familiar New Jersey. He would actually operate out of Hoboken, out of this eatery here at 615 First Street in Hoboken. This was a operation called Casella's. Now, Casella's was owned by Bobby Manna's counterpart, Martin Casella. And Casella would act for years as Bobby Manna's number two. And they would operate out of this dingy restaurant that most people would allege no one even really knew it was a restaurant. The only people that were really ever seen inside the restaurant were undesirables and people connected to Bobby Manna. Now, for Bobby Manna, things were good. He had as I said, continuously large and fledgling bookmaking and loan sharking business, and he was making tens of millions of dollars a year throughout the 70s and into the 80s doing those sorts of things. He also, like his father, had a lot of control over the New Jersey waterfront, concrete unions, ILA unions, garbage unions, all sorts of things in New Jersey flowed up to Bobby Manna, and he was very powerful. In fact, by the early 80s, as we know, Benny the Squint Lombardo would retire, and it was alleged that in 1981, Vincent Gigante would take over the Genovese crime family. He would promote his longtime friend, Bobby Manna, to not only control New Jersey for the Genovese family, but he was made consigliere of the Borgata. So basically, think of it like this: every Genovese captain, soldier, and associate was basically reporting to Bobby Manna. Now, Manna would be really the conduit for control, and people like Lawrence Little Larry Dentico, Tino Fiumara, and other high ranking members of the Genovese crime family reported up to him. The only boss that Mr. Manna had was Chin Gigante, and they were very close. He was very powerful in this family, was Bobby Manna. So things were good. He was making money. He was extremely powerful, and he anchored a lot of respect. Now, around this time, a family that would have some connections to the Genovese family was having some major issues. Around the time that Vinny Gigante takes over allegedly control of the Genovese crime family, there are problems setting themselves up in Philadelphia. As we know, Philadelphia very close geographically with not only North Jersey, but New York. And if we know anything about Philly, and ultimately after the death of Bruno, there were a lot of connections to the Genovese family. In 1980 of March, Angelo Bruno, seen here, is shot in front of his home in the 900 block of Snyder Avenue in South Philadelphia. Now, we would come to find out years later that an individual named Antonio Caponegro, who was based out of North Jersey for the Philadelphia family, was basically kind of, in a way, connived into murdering Bruno. Now, we would come to find out that Funzi Thierry, a high-ranking member of the Genovese family, alongside Bobby Manna and Fat Tony Salerno, basically connived Mr. Caponegro into taking out Angelo Bruno. They ultimately would take out Caponegro. Now, the goal here was to eliminate the high-ranking member in Bruno, slot in their guy, and take over and continue to take over the very profitable South Jersey and Atlantic City. Now, again, for Bobby Manna, he pretty much ran North Jersey. He wanted also to continue to maintain a lot of those huge and heavy rackets out of Atlantic City and out of South Jersey. The problem for someone like Bobby Manna was there's always someone that wants to come and fuck up what is good. And as we know, in 1985, John Gotti would assume control of the Gambino family by eliminating his predecessor, Paul Castellano. Now, John Gotti had a couple of things that he was going to have a problem with as far as the Genovese family. One thing was he wanted to muscle into South Jersey and do things down there as well. He wanted to muscle into New Jersey and get his hands on things. Now, for John Gotti, that was a very honorable and good thing to do because there was a lot of money there. And any good boss knows you have to constantly be growing. If you're not growing, you're dying. The problem, though, for the Genovese family was, in their eyes, they looked at what Gotti did as a blatant disrespect to the Mafia and to Cosa Nostra. And this would kind of create a hit, if you will, that would be anchored and put into motion. Now, by the mid-'80s, Bobby Manna had to realize that in New Jersey, he had to deal with not one, but multiple pronged problems, one of which was John Gotti. And by 87, the not only state of New Jersey, but the federal government had really started to set up a situation where they were bugging not only Bobby Manna, but multiple members in New Jersey. Now, a book written by a former cop in New Jersey would outline that New Jersey police and the feds were both kind of muscling in on people like Bobby Manna. And this is where the feds would contend by the late 80s that Bobby Manna was operating and was instructing members of his family to take out not only John Gotti, but his brother, Gene Gotti. I want to first start with that. The feds would allege in conversations over a 12-conversation period, not only would Bobby Manna discuss taking out John Gotti and certain subordinates, but his, quote, 10-year plan for the Gold Coast of New Jersey, meaning they wanted to, over 10 years, reap in the very lucrative profits of the Hudson River coastline through multiple housing developments and port situations. Also, according to certain conversations, Bobby Manna would discuss, quote, "You know this should be good and fast if it's John Gotti. Now, the feds down the road would basically assume that, and they would prove beyond a reasonable doubt, according to them, that that was a hit on John Gotti. And they were putting in motion to take out Gotti and his brother, Gene Gotti. Now, also in these conversations, Bobby Manna and his subordinates discussed an individual called Irving Schiff. Now, Irving Schiff was a 400-pound businessman who operated, according to the feds, as a mob loan shark. He also acted as a money launderer for the Genovese crime family. At some point, Irving Schiff, who by all accounts was a glutton. He was a 400-pound individual who paraded around New York in Rolls Royces. He had $1.5 million East Side penthouse, had a huge empire. He basically was skimming profits off the Genovese crime family. Now, Bobby Manna would mention that he had information that not only was Irving Schiff taking money from the Genovese coffers, but he was also a informant for the FBI. He would identify Manna would identify him as his code name CC, given to him by the government. Now, this was also a problem that the Genovese family had to deal with. And Bobby Manna, according to the FBI, basically instructed one of his top individuals, an individual out of Bayonne, New Jersey, called Richard Bocci DeCiccio, to, quote, take out Irving Schiff. They would stalk Irving Schiff to a restaurant called Bravo Sergio Ristorante at 2nd Avenue and 76th Street on the Upper East Side on August 8th, 1987. Now, as Irving Schiff sat at a table with a blonde woman called Judy, he would be shot multiple times in the head. Now, before his end to meet his maker, it was alleged that his last meal consisted of a Caesar salad, a double shrimp cocktail, veal rollatini, and rigatoni with bacon, onion, and tomato, followed by a nice dessert of bananas and strawberry flambe. Now, I gotta say, for someone that enjoys food, that sounds absolutely delectable. We have to say, for someone that met his maker minutes later, Irving Schiff dined on quite an assortment of delectables, we have to say. Now, the feds would allege that Bocci DeCiccio was the gunman that day, and he was told by Richard Bobby Manna to take out Irving Schiff. So one thing was handled, another thing wasn't. As we know, John Gotti was never ultimately killed. But by the late 80s, in the 1988-89 range, the feds alleged that they had enough to arrest Bobby Manna. That's exactly what they would do. They would indict him, not only, but certain people involved in his operation, including Martin Casella and Richard DeCiccio. Now, we can argue there's not a ton here, right? Now, we're going to talk about down the road the defense's argument that the feds didn't have enough here. Now, ultimately, weirdly enough, the sister of Donald Trump, Marion Barry, would actually be the one to ultimately convict and find all these guys guilty and sentence not only Bobby Manna, but Richard DeCiccio to 80 years in federal prison. Her sentence would come down in September of 1989. He would be convicted of conspiring to murder John Gotti, Gene Gotti, and Irving Schiff in aid of racketeering. So for Bobby Manna, it was all over for him, along with his counterparts. Now, I want to talk about the fact that I myself am 32 years old. I will turn 33 in July. And I think about the fact that we are coming up on 33 years since Bobby Manna was convicted and sentenced to basically life in prison. 80 years at his age was, according to the government, a life sentence. Now, the government was alleged to have just kind of taken things out on Bobby Manna because he did not want to break omerta. He was an old school gangster. Now, quite recently, the defense of Bobby Manna would actually file for compassionate release. The attorney for Mr. Manna, Jeremy Iandolo, would say that, quote, the government mishandled the evidence in this case. According to not only him, but DeCizio attorney Marco LaRocca, they were say the convictions were solely based on manufactured evidence, inconsistent testimony, and faulty elicited identification. Now, it is important to understand the wiretaps, there isn't much there. Now, they would include that they had identified a Manna as the guy in New Jersey, and anything that would be done that went down was approved by him. Now, I'd have to agree, this is pretty faulty evidence, quite honestly. There's not a lot here. It's basically hearsay. And just the one thing that did Manna in was, quote, this should be good and fast if it's John Gotti. Now, Manna ultimately would continue to sit in jail, and he sits there to this day in basically late 2020. Peter Sheridan would actually rule against Bobby Manna, and this would likely consign that Bobby Manna will die in federal prison. I did want to bring up an interesting connection to Bobby Manna. In 2004, the FBI would present a mention from a confidential informant that, according to him, Bobby Manna was attempting to instruct individuals in prison to not only off the judge in this case, Marion Barry, but Samuel Alito, who was the assistant U.S. attorney at the time, and Michael Chertoff, who was also an attorney for the federal government. Now, again, nothing really ever happened and all that, but this was something that was brought in motions in the 2000s. Now, to this day, Bobby Manna sits in federal prison. He is currently housed at the Federal Medical Center for Prisoners in Rochester, Minnesota. He is 92 years old. Now, recently we have seen a change.org petition that has circulated asking for the release of Bobby Manna. The truth of the matter is he is 92 years old, and he presents very little flight risk. He wants to spend the last couple years of his life with his family. Now, I am not a judge, nor am I an attorney or anything else, but it is led to believe that Mr. Manna is fairly inconspicuous. Everybody in his involvement is basically now dead. Now, the feds would allege that Bobby Manna, according to them, was still very involved with the Mafia up till like 10 years ago and still may be in some sort of control. He is still very feared and is still very much someone that the feds allege is still making some decisions in an administrative standpoint. Now, as we know, the family has moved on without him. However, I have to say, for someone that has basically was born the year that Bobby Manna went away, it is incredibly a large punishment to have him in prison this long for, again, something that they would just have hearsay on. He didn't pull the trigger here, and that's that. At the end of the day, though, Bobby Manna is someone we would call one of the last of the true mob Mohicans. He comes from the same cloth as Tony Salerno, Vincent Gigante, Vito Genovese, Fonzie Thierry, and the high-ranking members of the Genovese family who would form the most powerful triumvirate in the history of the American Mafia. As always, if you enjoy this video, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep this good Mafia content coming. We'll see you next time here on the Sitdown.